Dominant Heron, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's debate, where the House will hear the two speakers address the question, does God exist? You think somebody would have asked it before, we'd have got this over with, but somebody in Galway had a great idea. So at least tonight you know you'll be going home with a piece of information you didn't have when you arrived. You'll know whether God exists or not. And that's not something you'd normally get in an evening's entertainment. Tonight, the two speakers speaking to the subject are Michael Nugent, who will be speaking in the negative, representing Atheist Ireland, and speaking, shall we say, proposing the motion that God does indeed exist. We have Martin Molloy. The evening will both speakers will be speaking for up to 15 minutes, but no more. After that, then there will be a period of moderated discussion between both speakers, which will go up for a period of 30 minutes, after which both speakers will have a final summation of not more than 5 minutes. At that point, we will open the House, we'll open up the questions from the floor. Therefore, I would ask you to be continent during the earlier part of the debate, even if you are overcome with a great desire to make an absolutely brilliant and rapier-like observation. Write it down and hold it for the latter part of the meeting. Other than that, I just ask naturally that you give both speakers the usual courtesy that we would expect from the student body and the academic people of the university here in Galway. And we will kick off the night, and I'd invite Martin to propose the motion.
Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Michael. And Michael, ladies and gentlemen, does God exist, the creator and sustainer of the universe? Of course he does. And what's more, I'm going to prove it to you, starting with absolutely nothing. And the proof goes like this. I can't do it. I'm not able to do it. Well, why can't I do it? I can't do it because I said starting with nothing. And if I start with nothing, I'll only ever end up with nothing. As the medievals put it, ex nihilo nihil fit. Out of nothing, nothing comes. So I need to begin with something. I need to begin with assumptions. In fact, in every field of human endeavour, we have to begin with assumptions. In mathematics, we call them axioms. The distance between 2 points, 2 distinct points, is always a positive number. Now, I can't demonstrate it, I can't prove it, but I accept it to be true. In science, we have definitions. What is energy? We've never tasted, seen it, smelt it, touched it, heard it, never observed it, but we have a definition. It's the ability to do work. And what's work? Force by distance, what's force? Well, we've actually loads of definitions, and these definitions and assumptions have served us well. They've worked for us. So what assumptions shall I make? Well, the fewer the better. But the first is going to be the one that just hit me square in the face just a few minutes ago. Out of nothing, nothing comes. I need assumptions. I'll also assume the laws of logic. An example of which is the law of non-contradiction. A statement can't be both true and not true at the same time, in the same sense. And I'll also assume the law of causality, the very principle of natural science. if I see an effect, a phenomenon, it's got a cause. Why does the plant grow upwards? Well, we call it phototropism, but it's the light. The light helps it grow upwards, but what causes the light? The sun emits the light. What causes the sun to emit the light? Hydrogen nuclei crashing together at immense speed. What causes that? Well, that's the quest of science, to probe deeper and deeper into this chain of causes. In fact, those of us who are curious, this is the reason why we love science so much. As soon as we could reason, we were faced with two alternatives. Either this chain of cause and effect goes back forever, or it had a beginning. And pretty early on, philosophers figured out too that an infinite regress of natural causes is impossible. And why is that? Because we would never see the current effect. Let me explain that by way of analogy. Imagine that we had an infinite amount of days before this day. We would never get to the now, to this moment. And why not? Because in order to get to this moment, we would have to traverse an infinite number of days to get to now, which would take forever. Now, this is the reason why philosophers many centuries ago realized there was a first day, and why, similarly, there was a first cause. You know, the discoveries of the 20th century in science, and physics in particular, has corroborated what we had already figured out by reason. And that is, there was a moment when time, space, and matter came into existence. So whatever that original cause was, that caused time, space, and matter, must be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. Sounds like God? Well, possibly. But I might hear an objection. Someone might object, well, that could be some kind of blind force, like in Star Wars. Or it could be an intellect. So how do we distinguish between the two? I actually think it's a brilliant question. And we have an answer for that. And that is, we recognize an intellect by order, especially complex order. So let me take you to a beach. And on the beach we see a line hewn in the sand. Did that happen just by serendipity? Or did somebody do it? Was there an intelligence involved? Well, the answer is it could be either. But the two ideas are contrasted with one another. So imagine a pendulum, and we have chance over on this side, and we have intelligence over on this side. I would place the line in the sand, its origin, over here with chance. Not 100%, because we're not going to be certain, but just down a wee bit. There is always the probability that somebody did it. If I saw the letter T, I would move this pendulum down a wee bit more, not much, towards the direction of intelligence, but still on balance, I would be convinced it was chance. And if I saw a poem written on the sand, a poem, well, I would have to swing the pendulum the whole way across to intelligence. At 100%? Well, no. There is always the outlandish probability that this could be pure happenstance. So I'll just lower the pendulum the slightest wee bit. And in fact, the more complex the poem or the writing, well then, the greater degree I can raise the pendulum. But by and large, by the evidence, it is reasonable for us to take for granted that that is the work of an intelligence. So where is the poetry Where is the complex order in the universe? Well, again, in the 20th century, we've known more than ever that the universe is so finely tuned. There are a number of constants, fundamental constants and derived constants, that are so accurately pinned that allow the existence of the universe that it has astounded scientists. I'm talking about things like the permittivity of free space for electricity, permittivity of free space for magnetism, the ratio of the mass of the proton for the electron, the gravitational constant. Well, I'll take the gravitational constant because gravity is probably the one we're most familiar with. I suppose it had me bring me here today, among other things. But gravity, the gravitational constant is so finely tuned that if it were out by the 100,000th of the millionth part, if it was that much too big, we would have what was known as heat death. Everything would be just scattered. Too small, we'd have a crunch. That's only one constant. This is like, I suppose it's like doing the lotto, but not picking 6 numbers from 1 to 42. It's like getting the right numbers from 1 to 42 million. It is so finely tuned. So much so that many cosmologists have often, not all, but many of them have been intrigued by the fact that there's something going on here. It's a fix. Just like if I got the 6 numbers out of 42 million, you think there was something up. And then the probability for life. Well, that's even more staggering. For life, we need things like amino acids. There are about 500 in all, 20 we need for life, well, for the genetic code, another 2 aside from that. These amino acids have to be all left-handed, and they're produced in equal amounts in both varieties. These amino acids have to align in a certain order to produce a protein. A protein folds into a 3-dimensional shape that allows some chemical reactions and not others. And that's without even talking about actual DNA and the double helix, or RNA, its more simpler cousin. And the chances of these things happening purely by happenstance, again, are so staggering. It's like that lottery I mentioned earlier. It's like winning it every day for a month. Now, the average age that scientists reckon the age of the universe is about 14 billion years. It's not enough time for us to expect these things to happen, even if we allow for these large aeons of time. In fact, we only would have expected about 3 proteins at the most to have made it, never mind all the ones we need for life. So there we can see that there is an intelligence at work. And what's more than that is, if an intelligence acts on the universe, it does so with purpose. So there must be a reason. Because when we do things with our intelligence, we do it for a reason, and that's the essence of the moral law. We know that there is right and wrong. We've all have a sense that right and wrong is outside of us, even if we disagree about it. And we try to be good, we try and work it out with justice and fairness and reciprocity and compassion and love. But we know it's outside ourselves. In 2016, just last year, the Nobel Prize for Chemistry was awarded to Fourigne, Sauvage and Fraser Studart. These guys created molecular machines at a nanoscopic level, at 1,000 millionth of the width of a human hair. These machines can rotate, they can expand, they can contract. And their collaborative genius very intelligently designed these machines by plagiarizing what's already found in nature. In fact, the molecular machines found in nature are vastly, vastly more complex. I'm talking about things like the cilia and the flagella and all sorts of proteins are much more complex. Yet, if we honor their intellects, those guys' intellects, for what they have designed, so much more should we be in awe of the intellect that they tried to imitate.
Thank you very much, Martin. That was a fascinating proposition. And now I'm going to invite Michael to respond.
Thank you very much for inviting me here today, and thank you, Martin, for your contribution. The question, does God exist? It's not just a technical question about how the universe was created or began. It's also a claim about having moral authority, about telling us how to live our lives. And that puts a big responsibility on people who are making a claim that God exists, and a big onus of proof, because you have to prove not only a supernatural being, but also a supernatural being with certain attributes. And some of the attributes that the theistic God has or is supposed to have, some of which Martin has outlined. He's claimed to be beyond time and space, perfect and changeless, all-knowing, all-powerful and all-good, to have created the universe out of nothing and to sometimes intervene in its workings, to have a personal relationship with each human being on planet Earth, and to give moral commands to humans and to either reward or punish us for eternity. So that's where we're aiming for. We're trying to discover, does that type of being exist? And the straight answer is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is we don't know anything for certain. And that's just because of the nature of our minds, that there's a circular nature to knowing things, that we can't use our minds to test the reliability of our minds in knowing things. So what do we do in real life? How do we decide what we believe, and how do we try to minimize making mistakes and biases based on our personal imperfections? Well, I suggest that the least reliable way of deciding what we believe is faith and dogma. And by faith, I mean believing things because either you want to believe in them or you don't want to not believe in them, but believing them disproportionately to the currently best available evidence. And by dogma, I mean believing things on authority and without questioning them. Because when people make decisions about what they believe based on faith and dogma, what you end up with is different people believing different things about the same reality. So clearly it's an unreliable way of coming to the truth, or at least approaching the truth. The most reliable way is applying reason to evidence, and more specifically, jointly and objectively applying reason to the currently best available evidence, while remaining open to changing our beliefs if we get new evidence. And that's essentially, the scientific method is the best example of that. And the difference between faith and dogma on the one hand and applying reason to the evidence on the other hand is that the scientific method results in different people coming to the same conclusion when they, particularly when they use the same objective experiments. And I'm going to suggest that when we apply reason to evidence as opposed to using faith and dogma, that we discover several things. That the idea of a personal God, I'm going to suggest, is incoherent. That reality seems to be broadly as we would expect it to be if there wasn't a God. That morality seems to be broadly as we would expect it to be if there wasn't a God. And that natural explanations for things that have puzzled humans for generations are repeatedly and consistently and 100% replacing supernatural explanations. And there's nothing going in the opposite direction. So it's a reasonable default assumption that for the questions that we don't yet know, that there is more likely to be a natural explanation than a supernatural explanation. So let's start with the idea of a personal God. And Martin outlined some of his attributes earlier on. I'm going to suggest that idea is incoherent for several reasons. We're all familiar with the most cited one, which is that a God that's all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good could not or would not create a universe in which there was evil. And everyone's familiar with that one, and devastating enough as that is on its own to the idea of this God, it's only the tip of the iceberg. If God is changeless, then it cannot create a universe, because God would have to change in order to do the act of creating. If God is perfect, then God couldn't change in any way. or else it would either become more perfect, which is impossible, or less perfect, in which case it would no longer be perfect. If God is perfect, God wouldn't create a universe anyway. Because being perfect, it would have no need or desire to do anything, never mind create a universe, unless you believe that the universe itself is also perfect, in which case God must have created it eternally, in which case the universe is as old as God, in which case how can we say that God created it? If creating the universe means that God is the cause of the universe, then God is no longer beyond time, because cause and effect necessarily involve time. If God intervenes in the universe, then God is no longer beyond time and space. And if God is no longer beyond time and space, then God is no longer changeless. If God intervenes in the universe, then God has either created an imperfect universe, in which case he's not perfect, or indeed he wouldn't intervene in it, because if he had created a perfect universe, he would have no need to intervene in it. If God is all-knowing, then God would know the taste of strawberry yogurt, but God doesn't have a body and God doesn't have senses, so God could not know the taste of anything. If you counter that by saying, well, God actually only knows propositions, then God is not all-knowing. He is less than all-knowing. If God is all-knowing, then he knows what we're going to do in the future. And if God knows what we're going to do in the future, then our future is predetermined and we don't have free will. Or alternatively, if we do have free will and God somehow knows what we're going to do anyway, then God has created a universe in which he knows that he has created free agents that are going to do evil, which means that God is not perfect. Now, I could continue with this all evening. That's only a fraction of the incoherence of the idea of a God with the attributes that the theistic God is typically assigned with. But I'm going to move on to a couple of other issues that I've raised. The first is that I'm suggesting that reality seems to be broadly as we'd expect it to be if there was no God. We have a universe who, accordingly, Martin raised the fine-tuning point. I'll maybe leave the detail of that for the discussion later on, but broadly speaking, it's based on the idea that there are several constants of laws of physics that even if they're even slightly different, that life couldn't evolve. And that not even life, just physics couldn't have evolved. Matter could not have evolved in most universes with some of those constants changed. But of course, I mean that can be dealt with scientifically, with the most obvious current speculation being the multiverse theory, which again we can discuss in a minute. But more importantly than that, for the purpose of this discussion, fine-tuning, if it does exist, I don't think fine-tuning is the right word for it, but let's call it that for the sake of this discussion, that's far more consistent with the idea of a natural universe with no God. Because if you had a God, it wouldn't need to fine-tune the constants in this way. A God could just create a perfect universe without having to fiddle around with the laws of physics in order to make life possible to exist. And indeed, if you think that this God, which is another attribute of the theistic God, is that he has this personal relationship with human beings on planet Earth, if you think that this is what the universe was created for, then this God would be perhaps the most wasteful designer imaginable. The observable universe has over 100 billion galaxies. Each of them has over 100 billion stars, like our sun. It's 13.8 billion light years away in every distance, which is approximately 28 billion light years of a diameter, and still expanding. So all of this was created for the human project on planet Earth. A light year, by the way, is 6 trillion miles. Put that in perspective, our sun is 8 light minutes away. There can be 5 light years between each star, so God has wasted most of space. Out of 100 billion galaxies, God has wasted all but one galaxy. Out of 70 sextillion stars, God has wasted all but one star. And out of an incalculable number of planets, God has wasted all except one planet, which brings us to planet Earth, the grand stage for God's human project. And what has God done on this planet? Our universe is 14 billion years old. We don't know how many other universes might exist. Humans, well, we start with Earth actually. Earth is 4.5 billion years old. So God has wasted the first 9.3 billion years of the universe. Humans are 200,000 years old, so God has wasted the first 4.998 thousand years of the earth, and the Abrahamic God revealed himself 4,000 years ago. So God has wasted the first 196,000 years of humanity. So this is somehow what human beings believe has happened, that all of this was created in order for this being to have a relationship with human beings on planet Earth. There have been over 100 billion humans, about 7 billion of whom are alive today, and God seems to have been giving different messages to each of those humans, and every religious belief is in a minority, which is something that you wouldn't expect if there was an all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good God. If we move on to human life is, as we would expect, based on natural evolution. It's not, as we would expect, based on intelligent design. We can only live on a tiny part of the planet's surface, and the part that we can live on is plagued with earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis. We can die within minutes of being deprived of oxygen. We can die from cancers. We can die from birth defects. We can die from ectopic pregnancies. We can believe absurd claims disproportionately to the evidence, and we can do things that are counterproductive to our survival. And those of us that do the less things that are counterproductive to our survival are the ones that do survive. Human life is, as we would expect, based on natural evolution. It is not as we would expect if there was an all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing designer God. Yet with astounding arrogance, we continue to believe that we are the focus of all of this creation. Now let's look briefly at the idea that the personal God intervenes in the universe, another attribute that he's typically assigned what religious people would call miracles. And because we've limited time today, I'm only just going to focus on two of them. I'm going to focus on Lourdes and Medjugorje. The cure rate at Lourdes is about 1 cure for every 3 million pilgrims. That's far less than the statistics for spontaneous remission of cancer. The last official cure was in 1989, so in the last 25 years or so, you have a better chance of dying than being cured if you go to Lourdes. In 2012, the University of Vienna found that 86% of holy water has bacteria in it consistent with fecal matter, and that holy water from Lourdes has consistently caused hospital patients to be infected when people bring it into them. People who attribute these cures to God when they do happen typically don't attribute getting the illness to God in the first place. They only attribute the bit that they like to God. And if you move on to Medjugorje, whatever happened there in terms of people believing that the sun was spinning and dancing in the sky, it wasn't. If it was, everybody on earth would have known. In the same way as everybody on earth would have known if Allah helped Muhammad to split the moon in two. But of course, most Catholics will immediately realise how absurd that is, just as most religious people of any religion can immediately realise how absurd the miracle claims of other religions are. Again, in terms of intervention, the universe looks like we would expect it to if there was no God. It doesn't look like we would expect it to if there was a God. The second last point that I want to make is that morality seems to be broadly as it would appear if there was no God and if we had a natural universe. Morality is a natural function of our brains, and it has evolved in the brains of social animals, including humans, but not limited to humans, because cooperation is as important to survival as is competition. Now, non-human animals also display morality. There are experiments that show that a rat won't eat food if it realises that if it eats food that a friend rat of his gets an electric shock. There are experiments where monkeys are given a token to put in a slot. If they put the token in the slot, they'll get food. Sometimes one of the monkeys can't figure it out. Another monkey will take the token from them, put it in the slot, the food will come out, and the monkey that had figured it out gives the food to the monkey that hasn't figured it out. These are all examples of what if we saw humans doing it, we would immediately recognise as being morality in action. Indeed, those experiments, the fact that those experiments take place make me wonder about whether religious morality is or whether human morality is better or worse than non-human morality in many cases. But on average, humans have a greater capacity for morality because we have a greater capacity to reason. And that's ultimately what enables us to know whether something is good or bad, and enables us to apply our empathy and compassion and sense of fairness and cooperation and reciprocity and justice in a moral way. But it's hard enough to do that at the best of times because there's so many possible repercussions of everything that you do. But what religion does is it corrupts that process by adding in extra supposedly supernatural commands that have nothing to do with empathy or compassion or reciprocity or cooperation or fairness or justice, but you're told to do this anyway, even though it's not the compassionate thing to do because somebody wrote it in a book 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago or however many thousand years ago your particular religion suggests. And so you'll find absurdities, moral absurdities, like many Catholics believing that it's moral to deny AIDS victims condoms in Africa, and many Muslims believing that it's moral for a husband to beat their wife. And things that clearly you would understand are not moral if in any other circumstance you were being asked to do them. So not only is beliefs in God's not necessary for morality, it actually corrupts our natural morality. The final point that I want to make is that we notice, if we look at the history of science and philosophy and life generally, we notice that supernatural explanations for things are repeatedly and consistently overturned and replaced by natural explanations. We used to think that the weather was God being angry. We used to think that illnesses were people being possessed by demons. We used to think a whole load of things about the nature of the universe that gradually, consistently, we now have natural explanations for. Every generation we move more and more explanations from the category of God did that to the category of we now understand how it happens naturally. Now there are three big questions that we don't know the answers to yet. Three very big questions. One is what happened beyond the Big Bang. The second is how life began. And the third is the nature of consciousness. Science doesn't yet know how those things happened or happen. But given the consistent 100% traffic of supernatural explanations being replaced by natural explanations, and given that there's nothing moving the other direction, there's nothing for which we once thought that we had a good scientific explanation and now we realise that God did it, it's a safe starting assumption to say that unless we get evidence to the contrary, and we will remain open to that evidence to the contrary, we will start by assuming that if we find out the answer to those questions, it's far more likely to be a natural explanation than a supernatural one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. So now, as I said, we're going to begin the man-on-man action, as it were, the man-on-man of it. So we will have the interplay between the two speakers now, and after that, get ready with your own questions, which will take. We'll do this around half an hour. So, Michael, would you like to kick? No, you spoke last. You're probably a bit tired. You wanted to.
Yeah, so I suppose I have a number of points here, but I'll start with the last one that you made. You made the point that the general progress of science has been to move away from supernatural causes to natural causes, and there's nothing going the other way. And I would like to challenge that point in a way, and that is that when I spoke about the infinite regress of natural causes, I've always found it's traditionally always the place where atheists have needed to go. Not to deny the existence of God, but even to have a doubt. And atheists in about the 18th century, they would have said that the universe was eternal, and then with the onslaught of general relativity, Father George Lemaitre, who was a physicist, he realised that the universe was expanding according to the equations, that there was an original time, and it was ridiculed by atheists of the day, saying that's just a silly Big Bang theory, you're trying to sneak God into the lab. And that there had been a number of other atheist type explanations, like, you know, the Big Bang and then Big Crunch, Big Bang and Big Crunch, that was ruled out. And now we have the multiverse, is another way of getting the infinity in there. and you had mentioned it previously, but as you said, it's just a speculation at the moment. So can we really use a hypothetical like that as an evidence for an alternative?
Well, first of all, it's nothing to do with eternity. The idea of a universe that existed forever, or the idea of a universe that had a beginning, both of those are consistent with theism, and both of those are consistent with atheism. That's not what the issue is. The issue is, what is the most reasonable explanation? And the most reasonable explanation is found by finding objective ways and testable ways and seeing how far you can go with that. Now, where scientists have brought us in terms of the Big Bang, so I'm just placing that just so people can hear me, we have got back as far as the expansion before the Big Bang, and we don't know what happened before that. But when we say we don't know what happened before that, what it means is that current physics doesn't allow us to understand what happens before that. Because there are two levels of physics. There's the classical Newtonian level of physics, which is of what happens when medium-sized objects like tables and chairs and people and planets bump into each other and interact with each other. And then there's what happens at subatomic level, at quantum mechanical level. And whereas the argument typically at Newtonian level is you were mentioning earlier, everything has a cause and what causes the plants to move and what causes. But these are not causes. These are not things coming into existence. These are just rearrangements of existing matter. The matter that was in one form is now turned into a different form, and it now becomes a table or a chair. But the existing matter is there, and so if we move back from that to saying that because of that you speculate that means that the universe itself must have a cause, that doesn't make sense, because whatever happened in terms of the universe, it happened at subatomic level. It happened at an infinitely tiny, infinitely dense, infinitely hot. I'm using the word infinitely loosely, but at a very small level, and that is at a level of quantum mechanics where the cause and effect that happen at classical Newtonian space-time level don't take effect, and where particles do come in and out of the quantum fluctuations in the quantum vacuum without any explanation, and where things do happen in terms of the spin of an electron and so on isn't caused by somebody. There are so many things at quantum level that we don't yet understand how it works, but we do understand that it works. And the reason that I can confidently say that we do understand that it works is that virtually everything that we do in our lives today in terms of electronics, in terms of television, in terms of computers, in terms of GPS, in terms of medical advances, depend on quantum mechanic predictions being correct, and they invariably are to an enormous degree.
Well, the quantum physics and a lot of the quantum world is highly speculative, and what we do know was that the universe began, and we know by our reason that there is a cause, and although strange things happen at the quantum level, we know that there is a cause, there's a beginning, and that's what the evidence points to today. Now, whatever we discover in the future, we have no choice. I think you'll agree with me with this, that we must go with where the preponderance of the evidence takes us. And it takes us to a beginning, and that naturally takes us to a cause.
No, it doesn't naturally. First of all, it doesn't naturally take us to a beginning, and it doesn't naturally take us to a cause. Those are assertions that you have to prove rather than just make. The reason that it doesn't necessarily take us to a beginning is that we don't know where it takes us. All that we know is that it takes us to quantum physics level, where virtual particles do come into and out of existence from the quantum vacuum.
That's because we don't know why.
Yeah, exactly. But it doesn't mean that there is a beginning. We don't know.
Did time begin? You know that with the current physics.
We know. Yes, we know that the current.
There was a beginning of time.
There's a beginning of the current classical Newtonian time, space-time within the universe in which we live.
So there's a beginning of time, you accept that?
There's a beginning of the expansion of the current universe, which is coterminous with time, almost by definition. But we don't know.
So you begin, there's a beginning.
Sorry, can I just interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can I jump in here for a second? Because I think there is a danger that what we're basically, would you agree that we're working here off two alternative cosmologies? You're saying that that the existence of matter, the fact that the universe exists, demands a cause, demands a final cause, a first cause. But you're saying that we can't assume
exactly
that because matter exists, that means that there was a first cause, a first mover.
Yes, and I'm also saying that the reason that you're right, we don't know why that things happen at that level, but the reason that scientific explanations are more reliable is because A, they work. We see that they constantly work. We see that when religious claims are made, they don't work. And B, because they are consistent with the evidence. They are consistent with what we do know. Scientists don't just invent something like a God in order to fill the gaps that are there in the knowledge. They say, is this consistent with what we do know, and how can we test it?
That's unfair, Michael, right? I have to say that when scientists look and have probed deeper into these questions, we know that time began, and just think about that. There was a moment time began, so whatever that originated from, it was something timeless. Cosmologists and physicists have consistently been in awe. Like even many cosmologists realise it looks like there's some intellect involved here. Many of them, they might not agree with God as I see it, but they will say, as I see him, but they would agree that there is some element of the divine in their area of expertise.
That's simply not true. The vast majority of science, particularly in terms of physics, and most particularly in terms of cosmology, are atheists.
But
okay, folks, I think we reached the fruitful end on cosmology. I think we'll move on to another point. Would you like to kick off on this one, Michael?
Yeah, well let's move on to how you move, even if we grant for the sake of discussion that you believe that there is a cause to the universe, how you bridge the gap from that to this cause has a particular interest in human beings on planet Earth and sent his son to be crucified as a method of showing that relationship.
Right. Well, I haven't made that.
And indeed, how did it have a son?
Right. Well, I haven't made that claim in my presentation.
No, I understand that, but I'm asking you to.
So the way
you accept that's whether you take the specifics of that particular God, that having some sort of extra moral authority attributes are an essential part of being a God as opposed to just being a cause. So how do you get to the morality angle?
How do I get to the morality angle? Well, the first thing is, I think the rational way to approach this is we always approach it one question at a time. And the first question is God's existence. The question of has he spoken to certain people in the earth? They are things that we would answer after we've established God's existence. They don't count until we have established that fact. And what I said is that there is evidence from the fine-tuning and from life and even the origin of consciousness of the action of an intellect because of complex order. And when I said the seat of morality is, I suppose, the purpose. We were made for a purpose if there was an intellect involved. From our experience in the world, intelligences do things for a reason. Now, I'm not going into the details of what they are. That's for a later. I'm just establishing that principle before we move on.
Yeah. Well, I would dispute even that principle. I mean, that's an assertion that is not. Now, I'm not saying that it isn't the case, but it's not necessarily backed up by the evidence of science in terms of how humans operate. Consciousness is something that enables us to be aware of what it is that we're aware of. But it doesn't necessarily mean that we're making decisions. There are a lot of experiments that do suggest that we may not have free will, that we may not, it may be an illusion. There are experiments that show that when people are asked to take particular decisions and press certain buttons instead of others, and let the experimenters know when they're doing it, that the neurophysiological processes of moving to press the button have started several seconds before the person is aware that they have made it. So that it's not even necessarily the case. I realise that intuitively it seems to be the case, but it's not even necessarily the case that we have free will, and what you're saying.
But if we don't have free will, why does, say, your organisation fight for freedoms, human freedoms? Surely, otherwise it would make no sense for a free will if we were just an happenstance or the operation of chemicals.
Yeah, well, the difficulty with free will is that we don't know. Okay, now I mean, there's a more fundamental question than that, which is if we don't have free will, then how do we justify jailing people for doing things that are wrong? And the answer to that is, if we don't have free will, we don't have any choice in whether or not to jail them, because we're just doing it because we don't have free will either. I'm actually quite happy to accept that even if we don't have free will, that our experience of our existence is indistinguishable from what it would be like if we did have free will. So I think it's reasonable to, as a working hypothesis, in order to avoid going mad, to act. I mean, there are certain basic assumptions that, in terms of
so it works.
In terms of free
it
will,
works.
it
Like
works.
science works.
Yeah, yes,
quantum physics works.
Yeah,
mobile phones
exactly.
works.
And
that's enough for you.
And unlike religion, which doesn't work, and unlike God beliefs, which don't work, because God beliefs, unlike all of those things, what God beliefs do is God beliefs lead people to come up with entirely different beliefs about reality that seem to be congregated by where they grew up or where they happen to live, in a way that you wouldn't expect in terms of science. Wherever you are in the world, if you do a scientific experiment, you'll get the same result. If you pray to a god, depending on where you are in the world, you get a different result. And that's the key distinction between.
But that's not what we're arguing about here. We're not arguing about Hitler's prayers.
No, but if there was
existence of God.
Yeah, but it's not just a God. It is an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God with the attributes, including perfection and changelessness and timelessness and so on, that are incoherent.
So tell me, what attributes of God would you accept?
Well, I don't believe there is a God, so a reasonable start, if you were to expect that there is a God, a reasonable start, at a minimum, would be that it would be capable of communicating the same message to everybody.
Why?
Because it's supposed to be all-knowing, all-powerful.
Yeah, but we're not.
Sorry?
We're not.
No, but capable of communicating.
Why would it do that?
Well, if we're not, then it's not perfect, because it's supposed to have created us.
Why? But I'm trying to understand. Why would it?
Well, you're asking me why would
it communicate this to these people?
Well, you're asking the wrong person, because I think the concept.
But you're criticising it because it doesn't. I don't see that there's within the idea of God that there is a logical necessity that He would communicate this idea to these people.
Well, it depends on what attributes you're attributing. But if you are attributing as the theistic God is usually attributed to be perfect, changeless, all-knowing, all-good, all-powerful,
yes.
To have created the universe out of nothing, to want to have a personal relationship with each human being on planet Earth.
No.
That's a key attribute of the theistic God, which is essential. Look, lots of
so you're talking about the God that acts in history.
I'm talking about the God of the Knights of St. Columbanus.
So this is the God that acts in history. So how do you deal with this? If this is a God that acts in history,
well,
why does He appear to act in different ways in different places and different times? If He should be surely consistent. If He's acting in history, this God should be consistent to the way He behaves.
I actually think, to be honest, I think it's an unfair approach to say if we're talking about God's existence, that you divert the topic into, well, different people have different ideas of God. We start off with the existential question, the existence of God first. And it seems to be you're saying that if God was all powerful, everybody should have a similar message about God.
Yeah.
But that's about people.
Yeah,
and
but,
your argument almost sounds, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, because different people have different ideas of God, God doesn't exist.
No, what I'm saying is that...
Like, in fact, you know there are different theories of gravity. Different scientists have different ideas of gravity. We've got pressure theory of gravity, chameleon theory of gravity, we have modified Newtonian theory of gravity, there are about 20 other theories of gravity, but we don't say gravity doesn't exist.
No, because... Okay. I'll be happy to take a round of applause for accepting that we don't say gravity doesn't exist. But that's not the point. The point is, if you're genuinely serious about defending the idea of a God, you have to go beyond just defending the abstract concept that the universe had a cause. At best, that brings you to the deistic idea of something that created the universe and then just went away and got bored with it. If you are saying, and it was part of the attributes that you said you were proposing, if you're saying that this God is timeless, changeless, all powerful, perfect, all knowing, all good, then to go back to the point that we were making there, it wouldn't have created beings that are imperfect enough to not be able to understand the message that it could perfectly communicate to.
You see, all we can do, right? All we can do is follow where the reason takes us.
Exactly.
And that's why reason takes us to a first cause. It takes us to the fact of modern discoveries that this cause was the cause of time, space and matter. And I give an argument as well that it is an intellect. And that surely is what God means. Now, if you want to take the discussion off to something, to the finer details of a particular religion, then you can only do that. We only can do one question at a time. We're not debating which religion is true.
No, we're not debating which religion is true. And let's ignore the specifics of religious beliefs. But the idea of a theistic God, there is some moral authority involved. There is something that goes beyond just being a cause that created the universe. Because if you want to go back to our round of applause, our collective round of applause, one of the candidates for a potential beginning without a doubt is gravity. Not just quantum fluctuations plus gravity is conceivably under quantum physics a method of
so you're hanging your argument on a potential.
No, what I'm hanging my argument on is things that are consistent with what scientists already know, without adding on new dimensions. Now, you've again gone back to just asserting that reason brings us to a first cause, but it doesn't. You can't just assert that. All that you can say in terms of reason bringing us to a cause is based on classical Newtonian space-time physics. It's not based on quantum physics. There is no cause and effect in quantum physics. There are just probabilities.
Probabilities. That's because we don't know.
Exactly, but because
and
we
you're
don't
hanging, you're hanging now your argument on the I don't knows.
Exactly, and you're hanging yours on claiming to know when we don't. By claiming that you do know that there's a God. I'm saying that we don't know. I've never said there isn't a God. I'm saying that we don't know whether or not there is a God because we cannot be certain. And because we cannot be certain, the most reasonable position to take is to follow the evidence.
Yes, exactly. And that's where it points. And just because we don't know everything doesn't mean we don't know anything. And that is why philosophers, before even the current discoveries, were able to reason to a certain point that are now being corroborated. Now, I want to move on to the morality question.
Before you do that, I just want to clear this, because you've got 4 times now just asserted that logic brings us to a first cause. I've told you that it doesn't, because the unit...
That's your assertion.
No, it's the assertion of physics, which I know you understand. It's the assertion of physics, which is that we know that whatever happened before or beyond the Big Bang happened at the level of quantum mechanics. We know that at the level of quantum mechanics there is not cause and effect, there is merely probability. So you cannot You cannot jump from that there is cause and effect at the rearrangement
Well, I have to say you're out of order with the physics here, because there are what is actually happening at the quantum physics level is there's a lot of stuff happening we're not sure of, and many scientists are argue on how do we interpret these results. And the reason is because we're dealing with stuff so small that we need to use, anytime we even look at an experiment or use any instrument, it affects the result.
But
so
we do know
still have our logic.
But we do know it's based,
logic.
We do know it's based on probability rather than cause and effect. We do know that.
We use probability to start with how to make predictions.
Yeah, exactly. No, well, it's more than that. We do know that when in terms of, say, the double-slit experiment, we do know that is based on probability. It's not based on Newtonian cause and effect. We do know that in physics of quantum level.
Yeah. Okay, I think folks,
No, it's an important point because the key to it is that this bland assertion that reason brings us to a cause just isn't supported. And so it's important, given that that's the key from which you're building the rest of your foundation, it's important to clear that up.
No, I think you're right, it's important, and it comes down to the fact is that you're hanging your response on probabilities, and I don't know. We don't know all the details, but reason and logic still works. We've got nothing else to make.
Well, you have asserted that he's asserted that. So
now,
I think
can I mention the
there's not a lot fruitful left to dig here.
Yeah.
I think maybe we can move on to the last part of it, the morality of the issue.
Because I wanted to take issue with you quoted even studies again about rats won't eat food if it gives. I see you've been reading Beckhoff and Pierce, the Wild Justice, the Moral Lives of Animals, and I'll tell you this. This is a peculiar, selective examples of animal behaviour. Most animals eat each other. What about the spider, the black widow spider that eats their mate? What moral law do we get from that? Rats themselves, we know, eat their young. Cats, anybody who owns cats know they like to play with a half-dead mouse. They kill for fun. So morality doesn't... This is not the point that morality is a product of our brains. Morality only makes sense if there is a purpose in this world. That's what it means. And we all have an innate sense that there is a right and a wrong. It's part of our design.
Michael?
Do you accept the theory of evolution?
Do I accept the theory of evolution? It's a valid theory, yes.
Okay. Well, then you will understand that there are different species that are at different levels of evolution in terms of various attributes, and that what I said about morality is that morality is an attribute of social animals that is part of the process. It is combined with the competitive instincts and the instincts that both humans and non-human animals have. But essentially human beings are not, this is one of the key distinctions between God
is it an objective
and
morality?
is that,
it's an objective moral law.
Sorry, just like my principal point when we get to
yeah, okay. Well, you said two things there now that sound as if they're the same thing, but they're actually quite different. You said, is there an objective morality? And you said, is there an objective moral law? Now, I think there is an objective morality, but I don't think that there is an objective moral law in the context of there being a lawgiver. I think that the use of the word law there... That's
why you don't want to use the obvious phrase.
That's why I don't want to use the wrong phrase.
Yeah.
I want to use the correct phrase, which is that morality is the word that we use to describe our reasoned ability to understand that it is good to not unnecessarily cause suffering to other sentient beings. And that as our reason increases, we are capable of understanding that. If you've just had a child 2 weeks ago, okay, which I'm really pleased for now. If your child crawls into your kitchen and knocks over a glass of water, you're not going to give out to it because it hasn't done anything wrong, because it hasn't developed the reasoning capacity to know that. If I go into your kitchen and start knocking things around randomly, I am doing something wrong. So what morality is related to is our capacity to understand that what we are doing is causing unnecessary suffering to other sentient beings. That's essentially the essence of morality. Now, it manifests itself through attributes like compassion and empathy and cooperation and reciprocity and fairness and justice, but at its core, that's what it is. Now, if we had, I do accept that is an objective thing, and that there are things that it is objectively wrong to do based on morality. But if you add in the God beliefs into that equation, all that it does is it corrupts that morality. It tells people to do things that they know are wrong. I'll give one perfect example of how that manifests itself. In the Quran, there's a section in the Quran where it suggests where it tells people to lash adulterers 100 times. And the very next line is, and don't let your compassion stop you. And clearly the reason that was there, that they had to add in that second line, is that they realised that there were Muslims who knew, no, this is wrong, this isn't the right thing to do, this is not the compassionate thing to do, it's not the just thing to do. So they had to add in, and don't let your compassion stop you. What religious commands do is they corrupt the natural morality that we
right.
involved.
I'm really sorry, Michael, you've diverted now from the debate by talking about
You
the
raised
Quran.
morality.
No, but about the Quran, it's not relevant here.
Of course it's relevant. Why isn't it relevant?
Well, can I say, like, you've written a lot about your reasoned morality online, and I found it outrageous. You know, I found it outrageous
Which
that,
part?
well, that you say that from your reasoning that you are a pro-abortion vegan, and that you're more concerned about bacon and egg sandwiches than you are about a child about to be born.
I am more concerned with the born existing members of any species than I am with fetuses of any
I want both
Yeah.
to keep God into this. I
Yeah,
want God
exactly.
here.
But you see,
I'm
if
missing God.
morality is objective, and this is the problem. If we approach morality in this type of way, without acknowledging that it's outside of us, we end up with crazy things as well as stuff that we see in the Quran. In fact, you even go further, I have to say, and it has to be remarked, that you have a moral dilemma. Moral dilemma as a result of reason. The moral dilemma is, should you give meat to your cats, but you don't want to shove your ethics onto them. Now, this is not a sensible approach to morality. Morality is something that is completely outside of us. We're both trying to find it, or we're all trying to find it, and it only makes sense if there is some overarching moral law.
Well,
And you
this
can
is
call it morality for short, if you wish.
Well,
That
very
applies
quickly,
to
Michael,
law.
Michael,
very quickly. Well, this is one of the key differences between religious beliefs about morality and others. Is that religious beliefs somehow seem to believe that all of the other non-human animals on this planet were put there for our benefit. I don't believe that. I believe that every sentient living being on the planet has the same rights as every other one, and that we need to be as compassionate and empathetic about non-human animals as we are about animals. And I think I don't find it in any way strange to say that I would have a moral dilemma about whether I should assist in the killing of other animals in order to feed the non-human animals who I share my home with. So I think that is a perfectly moral dilemma, a perfectly legitimate moral dilemma to have. Now, in terms of the issue of abortion, quite clearly, virtually every pro-choice person that I know would prefer that there was no abortions. Nobody wants to have abortions. But if you have a situation where there is a competing morality between a living human being who has something else living inside of them, who for whatever reason they do not want living inside of them, that is a different issue to the issue of individual living born.
Yeah, and that's a
members
debate
of any
we'll
species.
have next year, I think. I don't really.
that's really, we don't want to go down that road.
Well, yeah, I think, but really the
So,
fundamental
folks,
difference is,
okay, folks, we're going to draw a line under that, and very quickly to control
right,
that.
well,
And
can I
I,
change to a different topic?
no, we're finished up on that. And now I'm going to ask the audience, and I'm going to ask them to provide. Okay, I want you to direct your questions. Hope we're going to try and do it A to B, as it were. Michael, Peter, Pete, fine, whatever. So if you could tell me who you're going, and we'll try and get them in order. And remember, the operative word here is question. It is not essay, discourse, even footnoted monograph. It is a question which will involve inverted verbs and inflection at the end. So, what is your question? To who? To Michael.
How do you think we could find the way to make understand people that believe cannot go with morality, cannot go with love, how can you make aware people, because people are most of the time spoon-fed by the Bible, by the Quran, by the Buddhists, by the...
So how do you make people atheists?
How do you outroot those people from their condition so deep, and they invent things or they believe things, they read in two ocean meeting. I see one kid last time online, I was talking with him, he was from Iraq or somewhere, and he was integrated completely. He said that two oceans arrive on the scene of the universe, they create the universe. How do you want to...
Well, there is there's a group of interdisciplinary social scientists that do a thing called the World Values Survey, and they've been doing it for the last few decades. And what they are finding is around the world that as individual people move away from survival values, where they're worrying about whether somebody's going to cut their head off or where their next meal is going to come from, and move towards self-expression values, that enables societies to move away from traditional religious values and towards secular rational values. And that's typically triggered by things like investment in health, education, communications technology, moves towards democracy, perceived control over your own life. And that pattern is happening around the world, with a bit of a lashback where there are some people retreating into fundamentalism as a response to the moves towards secularism. But broadly speaking, the developed world at least is becoming more secular.
Okay.
Can I respond to that?
Okay, fine.
Yeah. Just the point would be, look, there seems to be now that the question is about God's existence. How does this apply to the moral question? Well, I think what it seemed to open up to me is there are two ways of approaching this, nearly on how you answer this question. Do we invent our own morality, and we can call it reasonably, and we can get to all sorts of places, or at least do we try to find out what it is? Do we try to find out what the objective moral law is? That obviously implies an argument.
Okay. Next week, this is a question for Peter. At the back. Yeah, at the back. Sorry, for Martin.
Yeah.
So you say that logic implies that or reason implies that there must have been a creator. But my question is, where did God come from then? And if God can exist out of nothing, then why can't the universe?
How do you have an uncalled causer?
Right. Okay. So, the question is, who created God, more or less? Is it? Or
Yeah, and if God can exist out
Yeah.
of nothing, then why can't the universe?
So the question is, as I said, that the infinite regress of natural causes, because we know from nature that when we see an effect, it's got a cause. And by reason, we came to the fact that there is a first cause. That's where logic has led us to. And it doesn't make any sense to say what came before the first cause. We must go where reason has directed us. We must go where our logic has taken us. And if it says there's a first cause, well then there's a first cause. If we find out that there's a moment when time began, well then there's a moment when time began. We have to accept where the evidence has brought us.
Quickly, Mike?
Yeah, I'll quickly, you've heard this before, you cannot extrapolate from there being cause and effect at the classical space-time level of medium-sized objects to there being cause and effect at quantum mechanics level, which is the level at which whatever happened before the Big Bang.
Which we're not certain about.
Oh, sure, okay.
Yeah, well, you seem to be, I know.
There's a young man with the glasses. No, okay.
You must be a top physicist.
Okay. This man here for Michael.
No, I haven't said. I'm going to respond to that. I am the one that is saying that we're not certain. You're the one who's saying that it's a God.
No, I'm saying where logic takes us. We have no choice but to accept logic, and well, that's what I said at the beginning. I'm not prepared to sacrifice logic and reason, and it's taken us to a first cause, and that's what it's taken us to. So I accept the result.
Yeah, just saying it again and again doesn't make it true. You know, the unit, whatever happened,
Or any less wrong.
whatever happened before the Big Bang happened at quantum level, where
we don't know.
where the cause and effect of the classical space-time world do not hold. Sorry.
In the yes.
A question from Michael. Michael, isn't
Yeah.
it? You talked about objective morality, and you said obviously you're coming now from an atheist point of view.
Yeah.
So you're saying we can have objective morality without God.
Yeah.
Your idea is that we don't harm any other sentient being, as you said. My question is why then? I'm not an apologist for either side in that sense. I'm a Christian, but why then, when we look at history, and you've heard this a million times, but I'm going to ask you again, why then, when we look at history and we look at the countries that have based their whole society on the fact that God does not exist? Now, I'm not talking about secular societies as such, there's lots of them in Europe. I'm talking about the Soviet Union, I'm talking about North Korea, China, other places that have based their societies on the fact that God does not exist, and they're actually anti-theists. They pursue policies that try to educate people against the existence of God. Why then do we find such horrific human rights abuses in those countries, in those specific countries, where there's horrific, absolutely horrific destruction and murder on a mass scale? So how do you explain it? Again, I'm not talking about Norway or other places. I'm talking about these countries that specifically put it in their founding documents that God does not exist, and that they're going to make sure that.
Okay, I think we have the question.
Well, it's because they're authoritarian dictatorships, and authoritarian dictatorships are bad for human rights, whether they're run by religious people or by atheists. And I wouldn't for a moment suggest that being an atheist automatically enables you to make good moral decisions. Clearly, there are atheists who make bad moral decisions.
So it's just a coincidence that they all have horrific human rights abuses, and they all.
No. I mean, I don't. I mean, I really don't want to go down that road because I can give a list 10 times longer, you know, of religious theocracies that have human rights abuse. So, but I don't want to go down that road. But the key point is when you say you don't want to talk, when you say you don't want to talk about Sweden and Norway and places like that, I think that seems I don't know why you wouldn't want to, because surely we're trying to find models of places.
Base their societies on the fact that God does not exist.
Okay.
In fact, they were in their histories. They were founded on the fact that they were, and they were religious societies once, and they become secular.
Yeah. Okay, the more secular a country becomes, and there's consistent evidence of this, the more secular a country becomes, the less problems they have in terms of homicide rates, teenage pregnancies, abortion. Now, hold on a second. Now, this is okay. This is okay. So, now, see, this is here's another reason. Here's another reason why certain beliefs are not useful. Is that when you're given facts which are backed up by evidence and consistent research, and which is facts that are accepted by a lot of religious people who have studied the social science in it, laughing at facts doesn't make facts go away. The second part of that is if you take, for example, if you take America and you apply the same standards to America, you'll find that those problems are greatest in the Bible Belt states and least in the secular states on the coasts. There is also considerable research that consistently shows that atheists and secularists are less authoritarian, less
That's not what we're
racist.
debating about.
I'm answering a man's
I
question.
know, but I'm just saying.
I'm answering the question. I thought it was putting less racist, less sexist, less dogmatic, less authoritarian, less homophobic, less likely to want to use prison for retribution. There's a range of social outcomes that it's not controversial to say.
So how do you explain the atheist regimes then?
I just did, because they were authoritarian dictatorships, which are bad regardless of the beliefs of the people who are running them about the creation of the universe. Authoritarian dictatorships are bad. I presume we all agree on that.
Can I respond
Yeah.
here? Yeah, the problem is a lot of these surveys that Michael was talking about, like the World Values Survey, like you're talking about the Engelbert Benson survey. I would advise anybody to look it up.
Yeah.
It is the
So would I.
bizarrest graph ever. But there's dots all around the place. In mathematics, we call it a very weak correlation. And the countries that do well, like Finland, in other surveys we could say, well, Finland has got the highest levels of depression in Europe. We can make studies mean anything. And maybe to focus it on the God's existence, I'd like to take maybe this example. Michael mentioned that of all the 100 million stars and galaxies and the planets, and we're just one planet out of all of this mass. You know, what's so special about us? That's taken the evidence and interpreted it one way, and the way I see it is, wow, that makes us so. This is a special place. If this is the only place where life is, so we all see the same evidence, but we choose to interpret it differently.
Okay, this one for
Sorry,
for who?
For Martin.
Martin. Okay.
Thank you.
Martin, how are you doing? Martin, I found your presentation. It was gobbledygook as far as I'm concerned. Can you not just accept that we're one species? We live in one small planet. In fact, we're a very stupid species. Now 7.5 billion of us. Over the last few hundred years, we've destroyed the habitat of every other plant and species on our planet, and that's we shit our own doorstep.
Well, I don't know how to respond to how that's relevant to does God exist. I don't understand.
Well, the point I'm making, we've only one life. So
Yeah.
there is no God. We've only one life on this planet.
Well,
What is
what's
this
your
que-
counter
what's your
argument
question?
to your
Sorry,
question?
60, 70, 80 years, that's it.
What are you on your
But what's
question?
your question? I don't understand.
Your question is?
Well, I didn't understand the word. I could not comprehend what you were on there, but a very long time.
I have a quick question.
You have a question there?
Yeah,
Come on.
thank
How did
you.
you arrive at your God belief, and what would it take for you to change your mind?
What would it take for me to change your mind? I think that's a brilliant question. What would it take?
And how did you get there?
And how do they get it? But that's,
Two small questions.
well, I suppose I'm a mathematician by training, and I went through a skeptical phase, and I suppose I think during my presentation I've opened up a bit to the direction that brought me to realising that there was a creator. Now, what would get me to change my mind? I've often heard, and I'd like to know how you would answer this question as well, Michael. I've often heard many atheists being asked this question, and they say in theory, that they're open if there's new evidence. And when asked for what kind of evidence is needed, anything that they give is always fantasy, stuff that they know will not happen. But what I will say is, what would convince me otherwise? For something to convince me otherwise, it would have to convince me that logic and reason are not good tools, that we can't rely on them. And I am not prepared to do that, because that is where it has taken me. Logic and reason, what else have we got?
That man there for?
Yeah, ask Michael.
Did Michael
For Michael.
I respond to that one more?
Yeah, I think broadly, if we take it that this God has the attributes that he's supposed to have, I think I mentioned this earlier, that I think the first step would be being able to communicate the same message to everyone.
Okay.
And because that doesn't happen, yeah.
Okay, sorry, that gentleman there for Michael, yes?
Michael, I understand you don't believe in free will, or is that true?
No, I'm saying that Sorry, if you want to ask do you want me to clarify before you ask the question?
Clarify first, but I'll ask a question.
Yeah.
It was just that you blaming authoritarian regimes for all the things that happen within an atheistic regime. But if you don't believe, if free will doesn't exist, then that shouldn't really matter whether they were authoritarian or not. It was the nature of the problem.
It just doesn't.
Yeah, no, I wasn't saying that I don't believe in free will. What I'm saying is that you can't automatically assume that we have free will based on the existing evidence, either from a scientific perspective or from a theological perspective, because there's a whole lot of theology. There are a whole lot of sorry.
Sometimes you can see it with your own eyes. Some things are kind of obvious.
Yeah, I mean that's why.
Why would people have risen up in the Eastern Bloc looking for freedom if free will didn't exist?
Yeah, and that's why I also said that I don't think that it's a particularly important issue to debate, because even if there isn't free will, what we have is so indistinguishable from the appearance of free will that it's effectively the same thing.
If free will does exist,
Yeah.
does that not allow people to respond differently to how maybe a God would be in contact with them, and therefore explain why there are different?
Yeah, it would if the God wasn't perfect, but this God is supposed to be perfect.
Okay, and we're up here for Martin.
Yeah, for Martin, yeah. Martin, most or all of your arguments tonight point to the gaps in scientific knowledge. And these gaps are taken to the evidence of God. If you point to any argument that you made tonight, it does not stand on a lack of knowledge or on an assumption and has its own empirical evidence.
Okay, well, I would challenge that assertion that what the programme that I laid out in coming to that conclusion was, I said we need assumptions. No matter what we do in life, we need assumptions. And I followed a logical path that led us to a cause that is the first cause that we know from empirical evidence of the 20th century, in particular, that time, space and matter began. And I also used empirical evidence just to show how we would recognise an intellect. Maybe in complex order. Maybe here I might call a strange witness, and that is, I don't know if people have heard of SETI, S-E-T-I, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And these are people, they've actually got a big wad of funding there just in 2015. And they scoured the universe trying to look for what they might think is alien life. So what are they looking for? They're looking for complex order, signs of technology, some sort of signals that, and why am I mentioning them? And most of them will not agree with me in this question. That is because there is a scientific consensus on what the works of an intellect look like.
I agree that you have used empirical evidence to reach the edge of your knowledge. You've used empirical evidence to reach the Big Bang.
Yeah.
But once you reach that point, your use of empirical evidence stops because it has to, because you don't have any empirical evidence.
Okay.
And it's then that you start in God. I agree with you, you've used empirical evidence to reach that point. And that's the point at which you need to slot in God. And that's the point where I think an atheist will turn around and say, I don't know. But a religious apologist will say then that I have the answer. And I think that's the big difference between an atheist.
Yeah, well, I don't claim to have all the answers. What I'm saying is, look, there's a basic principle, and it's an empirical one. Like, if we want to know what created human consciousness, we don't know, but we do know one thing. It wasn't human consciousness. What created life? The one thing we do know, it wasn't life. This is empirical. What created the universe? It wasn't the universe. What created time? It wasn't time. Or what caused space? It wasn't space. What caused matter? It wasn't matter. So the first cause is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. And that's where I have brought us by reason. And you can argue over the name if you want, but I think to everybody's comprehension, I'm talking about God.
Michael, just quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to bore people now. You're using the logic and evidence of classical Newtonian space-time, medium-sized objects, and trying to transfer that to an area where our current knowledge of physics even at a quantum level, breaks down and we simply don't
Are
know.
you saying, Michael, if we didn't have quantum physics, you would believe in God?
No, of course not. Absolutely, exactly. What I'm saying is, from the very start, I've been saying that we can't be certain about whether it's God. I've been saying we can't be certain about anything. I've been saying that there are several very important things that science doesn't understand, which include what happened before or beyond the Big Bang, which include how life began, which include consciousness. I'm saying I'm accepting all of these things. I'm not being in the remotest way about it. I'm saying that I'm open to the idea that there is a God. I've no vested interest in there being no God. I particularly the type of God you're talking about. My younger brother died in a motorbike accident when he was 19. My wife died of cancer a few years ago. I've spent my life campaigning against IRA terrorism, against injustices wherever I see them. If there were to be an all-powerful, all-good, just God, I would be delighted. That would suit me down to the ground. So I have no.
Yeah, but that's not the way either of us approach this topic.
Sorry?
I have not approached it that way either. It's not about wishing there to be a certain answer. It's about following where the evidence goes.
Exactly, which is what I am doing, and I'm following the evidence in as unbiased a way as I can, even going against what would be my best interest if there was such a thing.
So, young lady up there, please.
So you just said
For
that
Michael.
so you say that you're trying to follow evidence, but in your introduction or when you read each had like that time to talk, you spent most of your time trying to prove that God doesn't exist through his attributes. So if someone didn't exist, how can you prove that they don't exist based on their attributes? Like if there is a painter who made a painting, no matter how you express that painter or describe him, he still made the painting, and the painting is proof that he exists. So I don't believe that just stating attributes can prove that someone doesn't exist or something or a higher power doesn't exist.
Well, I'm not inventing the attributes. It's the religious people who are proposing that this being exists and has these attributes. I'm responding to the claim that a being with these attributes exists. And what I'm saying in terms of the analogy that you're saying is I'm saying, well, let's look at the evidence before us and see, is it more consistent with the being existing or the being not existing? So let's say your painting thing. If we look at the painting, and if the painting is something that looks like paint has been put on a canvas in a way that painters do, and if there is a painter standing beside it with a big smile on his face having just signed it, then the evidence would point towards the painter being there. But I'm saying that evidence isn't there with regard to the God idea. Because, first of all, we don't see the God, and secondly, the attributes that the people who believe in the God are giving to him seem incoherent, inconsistent, and unrelated to the evidence that we're looking at.
But the fact that you have the choice to believe or not kind of proves that there's free will, and it proves that God is timeless and that everyone can perceive God how they want to. So because there's so much unknown, it takes more faith to believe that God doesn't exist than it does to believe that he does.
Well, everyone can perceive or believe whatever they want, obviously. But I mean, by definition, I mean that even if there was a God, most people are wrong about it because each specific God belief is in a minority. So the fact that people can believe something doesn't make it true.
Sorry, you stand for.
Hi, thank you, moderator. My sister has been battling cancer for the last 2 years, and what's happened with her is she was very religious, but she's more faith in the scientific community that's curing her and it's helping her getting through this by medicine, which was created by scientists. Why isn't God doing more to help her, not psychologically, but physically? That was for you, Matt.
That's for me. Well, look, the question we're dealing with is, does God exist? And I logically follow the program, and that's the conclusion that we get. There are a whole lot of questions that we still have. Like there is the issue of evil in the world and things that happen in our lives, and the very fact that, as well, that okay, this cause of this creator too, obviously created the scientists, but science and God are not opposed. They're not opposing things.
That's very important to me, though,
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
No, but
I know
what I'm
that.
saying is they're not opposing things. And what we don't have all the answers for everything. We don't understand everything. But we do know that science, and there are many scientists who have been overwhelmed with the evidence. One I'll actually mention, but he's not a scientist, but well-known atheist in the 20th century was a guy called Anthony Flew. And in 2004, he was so overwhelmed by the discoveries in science that he said that an intellect had to be involved in the universe. Now, we all have difficult things in our lives, and I don't have, and I don't purport to have the answers for those. But we know all the discussion here is about the existence of God.
I know, but he's all knowing, all giving, all loving.
Yeah.
Why isn't he doing something about this?
Well, all I can say is that God allows or tolerates, if you will, some bad things for a greater good. But that is not for a greater good in the end. That's the only thing, the only explanation. Yeah, but we're talking about God's existence.
I know, yeah,
here.
but if he exists, that's the whole thing about tonight. Does God exist?
Yes, exactly.
And if he does exist, why isn't he helping my sister?
Yeah, I know. Listen, I can't answer specifically with your sister, but like Michael said earlier, you know, we've no vested interest to approach this question. We should have no vested interest to approach it clearly, like whether we want a certain answer or whether we don't. All I have said tonight is that logic and reason has taken us to a certain conclusion, and there are still a lot of mysteries around.
Just very quickly on that.
Yeah, I empathise with what you're going through.
Yeah.
Being through itself, and the obvious answer to your question is that because God doesn't exist.
That gentleman in the back from Michael. In the blue shirt.
You just said God does not exist, and yet there's no certainty. You started your opening statement with that, the fact that there's no certainty, but yet you are certain of objective morality. And I'm curious, with someone who doesn't believe in certainty, how there can be objective morality. That's my first question. Second tier of the question would be, you said as science progresses, you see the lack of God, and yet you can see as science progresses, you're saying that the world seems to move along naturally in a better path. But yet you can see concurrently families breaking up, an increase of suicidality. You cannot just simply say that that's the progress of science. We're looking at more happy people. So there's no progress in mankind without happiness. How would you address that?
Okay, well, firstly, I'm not certain about anything. I'm not certain that you exist. I'm not certain that I exist. I'm not certain about anything. So, but not be,
Are you certain about what you're saying?
Sorry?
Are you certain about what you're saying?
No.
So you're not certain about what
No.
Let's not turn this into a geography argument.
No, I'm not certain. Even to the extent of the Descartes, I think therefore I am. You know, that's flawed because that's assuming in the I in saying I think. So I'm not certain. Everything that seems to be might be an illusion. Okay, I'm not certain about anything. Now, what I am saying is that given that we cannot be certain about anything, that the most reasonable default position to take is to say what seems to be the most reasonable belief.
And he's certain about that?
Based on no, I'm not certain about that. Based on applying reason to what seems to be the currently best available evidence of my senses, and based on trying to combine that with other people doing that objectively to try to minimise personal bias. So I'm not certain about anything, but not being certain doesn't mean that you don't take a reasonable default position until such time as you've been proven otherwise. Sorry, what was the second part?
No, you can't be an atheist. The best you can be is agnostic.
No,
to claim to be an atheist.
No, that's a confusion about atheism and agnosticism. A lot of people believe that atheism is here and theism is here and agnosticism is somewhere in the middle, as I don't know. That's not the distinction between atheism, theism and agnosticism. Atheism and theism are about what you believe. Do you believe that there's a God? Do you believe that there isn't a God? I strongly believe that there isn't a God based on applying reason to the evidence. So no, it's not. No, I strongly believe it's not a statement of certainty. Particularly given that I've just preceded by saying that I'm not certain.
What you believe.
Again, I mean, how do you I'm going to say without certainty before it sinks in.
But even what you
Yes,
believe about what you
even
believe.
even what I believe about what I believe. Yes, I mean, how many different ways do you want me to say it? I'm not certain about anything. Okay. Now, so atheism and theism are about what you believe. Agnosticism is about what you claim to be able to know. Do you claim to be able to know that there is a God, or know that there isn't a God? I don't claim to be able to know that there is or isn't a God. So I am an atheist because I believe that there is no God. I am also an agnostic because I don't claim to be able to know that there is no God. They're not mutually incompatible.
Okay, this one here.
I was just thinking there, you were saying that we're an illusion, you're making all these statements, but that's and the certainty that you're not certain of things, that's violating the law of non-contradiction. That's basic logic. That's philosophy 101. So I would say is if everything like is an illusion, why should I believe what you're saying? And if you're not certain, then why are you getting angry when people disagree with what you say?
I'm not getting angry.
Because no, not angry, but you're defending your worldview.
Yeah.
Really, if there should be, if you're an atheist or if you think that there's no such thing as certainty, then you should really be having a debate. You should be in a bar talking about the Arsenal match or something which is silly. I don't care.
Well, I prefer to talk about a Leeds match.
Yeah. I can't.
But no, I don't think there's any contradiction. Saying that you're not certain doesn't mean that you're not capable of engaging in discourse or capable of forming beliefs that are my current beliefs based on applying reason to what seems to be the currently best available evidence. I mean, I do exist in what appears to be a real world. So I mean, all that I'm saying is that I am always, however much I believe something, I am always open to the idea that I might be mistaken because I might be misinterpreting the evidence.
At the back.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Question for Michael.
Yeah.
You're saying that science is in support of your arguments tonight.
Mm.
But at the same time, you're saying that you can't be certain of anything.
That's
certain of empirical science.
because that's the core of science, is that you can't be certain of anything. Science doesn't claim to be certain of anything. So science operates on the opposite of certainty. Science operates on the basis of forming a hypothesis and testing that hypothesis, not to see if it's right, but to see if it's wrong. Science operates by trying to chip away at things that seem to be inconsistent with the evidence in order to gradually approach closer and closer to the truth. But science recognises that, when I say science, I don't anthropomorphise science, but the scientific process, integral to the scientific process, is the idea that it is not producing certainties.
Can I get that gentleman there in the blue jumper?
I'll talk to you later because I've been superseded here.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry.
Michael, was there ever a time in your life that you did believe in God? And if you did, what caused you to stop believing?
Well, I remember when I was in primary school, and one Easter holiday we were given a project to do over the Easter break to read the Gospels and rewrite them in our own word. And I was quite a swot at school. I spent the whole Easter holiday on this project, and we had, I don't know if you remember back then, we used to have copybooks with a space on the top to draw pictures and lines underneath. I drew the stories, I was writing it out. I remember halfway through doing that, thinking that this Jesus character is kind of like Batman or Superman or something like that. It just seemed to me like a comic book superhero. And so from then on, I didn't really believe. For a long time, I made the same mistake as I suggest you were making up there. I considered myself to be an agnostic rather than an atheist on the basis that I didn't know, and then it gradually dawned on me, not dawned on me, through reading and talking to atheists and things, that you can be both an agnostic and an atheist.
That gentleman in the glasses?
Thank you.
For Michael.
Michael, just one very quick question. If there is no certainty, let's say, including in mathematics, will you defend my right to underpay my taxes?
Well, yeah, I will.
If it's Ireland, but if it's Ireland, it will be, that becomes a problem.
I'd have to also defend the government's right to put you in jail for it.
I had a, sorry, this gentleman here, are you happy? You gone? No?
Yep.
This gentleman here, far?
Michael.
Nobody, okay, Michael, sorry.
I'm sorry.
You're in the firing line again. I'm afraid
Okay, what is it?
So, like, there was a bit of discussion about, first of all, the prime cause, and then the differences, I suppose, between quantum physics and Newtonian. If, at a future date, the whole quantum side of things could be proven to behave as the Newtonian side does, with cause and effect, would that bring you closer to believing in God?
No.
And
And
a follow-up question.
Yeah.
If we were to postulate that this first cause was, let's say, some kind of, I don't know, flying spaghetti monster, would that sit well with you?
There's a big distinction between a cause and a God. As I say, if you don't want to take things outside of the realms of matter, the most likely force that could be a cause is quantum virtual particles plus gravity. I mean that you could, if you wanted to speculate, you could say that as a lot of the more leading edge cosmologists, even those who do consider that there was some sort of a beginning to our universe, but who bring it on to the idea that there's probably a multiverse of different universes, each of which come into being, and who accept that there may be a cause for that. What they say is, if things did come into existence out of nothing, that the nothingness is just an absence of matter, but that something like gravity could be speculatively a cause. But there's a huge step from that to the idea that it's a person, to the idea that it has moral authority over us, to the idea that it will reward or punish us for an eternity if we don't do what it tells us.
Can I respond? Because
Sorry.
there was a second part to that about the flying spaghetti monster.
Yeah, I think the flying spaghetti monster is a very useful device for highlighting to states that's essentially what the flying spaghetti monster. It emerged in the United States, where people were saying, if you're going to teach evolution in schools, you should also teach creationism in order to teach the debate. And so this group started the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster and said, well, if you're going to teach creationism, then you also need to teach about the flying spaghetti monster. In Ireland, there is a Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster that is currently challenging the government's decision to decide who can and cannot be a religion for the purpose of being chaplains in state institutions and for the purposes of solemnising state marriages. So I think the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster is a very useful institution for highlighting the random way that political states give privilege to some religious beliefs and not to others.
Can I respond to that? Yeah, the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster claims that there is an uncaused cause with time, space, is what I've said, only it's the Flying Spaghetti Monster who is invisible, and we know this because we can't see him. You know that we have in Ireland, we have a minister, or I think 3 ministers in Ireland of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. One of them is John Hamill, who lives a few miles away from me, and they're looking for rights to be recognised as a religion. But he's also a member of Atheist Ireland.
So what?
Yeah, he's also a member of Atheist Ireland and secretary of the Atheist International Alliance. And, well, so what?
Yeah.
What it sounds like to me is this, that imagine we were debating about whether I exist, Mark Molloy, and somebody says, oh, I believe Mark Molloy exists, and he's a dirty old slug in my backyard. Well, the way I would take that is, you're losing the debate, so therefore all you're left with is to sneer.
This lady here, question for Martin?
For Martin, yeah?
Yes.
Martin, one of the attributes you've given to God is that God is good. Is it not just as likely that God is evil? Is it not just the same probability? So why have you decided that God is good?
Why is God is good? So as opposed to an evil God or a good God. So we could have, so we could have a good God. So to put these opposed to each other, we could have a good God who has made us free to be good, but we sometimes choose evil, as opposed to an evil God who has made us to do evil, and freely we sometimes do the good. Well, I think the answer to that can be found in an innate sense of morality. We all want to do what's good. We all, even if we disagree, we all have a sense that we want to do what's right, and therefore that's our design. And we also have a like for what's true, and we have a like for what is beauty, things that are beautiful. And I think that is what indicates to us that if that's the way we're designed, well, it tells us something of the design.
Maybe we're all just rebels. Maybe we've all just been designed to be rebellious, and we're all just rebelling against an evil God.
Well, what I'm saying is you can tell something about the designer from the design, and that's what we see, and I think that's
The
that
girl,
follows.
the lady in the back for Michael. No, yeah, you for Michael.
So I have a question that you used in your speech. You had an argument, and it's the argument you hear all the time. If God is so good, why is there evil in the world? Right? Now I'm going to propose to you, God cannot create anything that's perfect, because perfect means complete, right? Means whole, lacking nothing. So if we were lacking nothing, we would have no need for a creator. There wouldn't be the question of, is there a God or is there not a God? There wouldn't be the question of cause and effect, right? There would be an explanation. We would be able to, we would be whole in and of ourselves. We would not have had to have parents. We would not have had to have been created. So my question to you is, how can you say that God doesn't exist just because he doesn't create perfect things? Because
Okay, that's the question. We haven't. Why?
Okay.
How is it? Because God doesn't.
Yeah, well, it wasn't just because of that. I gave about another 30 reasons as well. But it was, and one of them was essentially the same argument as you're making, but applying that same reasoning to God itself. If God itself is supposed to be perfect, then God has no reason, or not even no reason. God would not create anything. It's not that it wouldn't create an imperfect world, it wouldn't create anything. Because if God is already perfect and complete and whole, it has no reason to create anything or to do anything, particularly given that it's supposed to be also changeless and timeless. So I think it's just one of many inherent contradictions in the idea of a God with the contradictory attributes that it's typically given.
Can I just have a quick response to that? Yeah, listen, when we're talking about things like omnipotence and omniscience and about God, it's very, very difficult for us to understand those ideas. They really blow our mind. An all-powerful God. And all we understand the best are natural phenomena. Not things that are, I suppose, supernatural, if you will, beyond that. But like if you were to take something like omnipotent, I think creating a world, that's pretty impressive to me. But that we only can go as far as in our minds, as far as the natural things will take us. Yeah.
Young lady there. Hello. Yeah, you for Michael.
Yeah.
Next.
Right.
Right.
Not very good at phrasing stuff, and I'm
Just-
correct.
just
so I'm
think
going to screw this up.
It's a question. That's all you have to think.
You're on about sneering with regards to, what you were saying earlier about you being slug in the garden and all that kind of crack, and how uncertainty, how you use the phrase uncertain and stuff like that. But
Is this for me?
no, it's for you
Yes.
guys, but
Right.
yeah. But technically you aren't certain as to why there is suffering in the world. Like if God was like as class as he's made out to be and like just and great and all that crack, why is he feeling the need to inflict so much pain and suffering and all these wars and all that kind of crack and everyone getting caught up in all that stuff, and like why would he do that if he was so perfect? Why would there be so many diseases and so much hurt and so much stuff even on the innocent souls? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Listen, the problem of evil is certainly a difficult one, but like my point is that logic and reason takes us to a certain point, and there are plenty of mysterious questions that we don't fully understand. But surely the scientific and the irrational approach is when we can go so far with our reasoning to our answers, we accept the answer, and even if there are things mysterious, you know, we still have to accept how far we've managed to get. And you've got to, by a reason, to attain the spaces and material on cause, push cause, that's got an intellect. And that's my approach. Yeah?
No, this gentleman here for...
Question from Michael. In Michael's opening address, he said that man has evolved to an acceptable level through his being and his morals. Point I would like to ask Michael to explain is that help me understand that why is it that the secularization of the Western world to push God out has led to the moral destruction of the fibre of the people in the Western civilization?
Well, the answer is it hasn't. And in fact, the opposite is the case. That if you look at religious-run states, they have considerably worse human rights records than secular democracies. If you look at authoritarian dictatorships, they have the worst. They have the worst outcomes. Regardless, can I just finish the point, and then I'll take your follow-up. Authoritarian dictatorships have the worst outcomes, regardless of whether they're run by atheists or religious people. But the evidence is that the Western developed world, you know, with some pushback from fundamentalism, it is becoming a better place to live. If the European Union, one of the things that it has succeeded in doing is bringing effectively, you know, peace to Europe in a way that it hadn't had for generations. Now, and again, if you go back to the World Values Survey, go back to any number of non-controversial social science outcomes, you'll find that the developed world is better. And one of the key tests that I would give for anything like that is, are people trying to move into the Western world or move out of it into religious countries?
You're missing my point, Michael. My point is that in the last 60, 70 years,
yeah,
as the secular society is pushing God out of the Western society, that the breakdown of family, marriage, the total destruction of everything that is based, solid, to the building up of our society has been undermined completely. And how can you explain that when God has been removed from this, all of a sudden it's starting to fall apart?
No, I'm disagreeing with your premise. I'm saying it's not starting to fall apart. I'm saying that people living in Western secular democracies are living in a much better environment.
They're less happy though.
Sorry?
They're less happy.
Well, it depends on who you're talking about. If that was the case, people wouldn't be trying to move out of religious theocracies and into the Western developed world. They would be doing the opposite. They would be trying to
move out of those theocracies because they're being
Sorry.
wrong.
Well, okay, sorry, we try and keep the thing, and maybe they're just moving out of poor places and going to rich places. It is the god of mammon we should talk about. I'm going to take this gentleman, and then I'm going to take three more nice people, and then we're going to go to summation, because we all have a pub to go to.
That's very good. Thank you. I just have a question. John Stuart Mill famously said that there was possibly places in the world or in the universe where 2 + 2 didn't equal 4. Perhaps in the next room, 2 + 2 might equal 5, 15, or whatever. This, of course, greatly undermines the scientific method because one must have certainty that logic has led us to understanding of the universe, of the world, that 2 + 2 does in fact equal 4. Bertrand Russell also famously did not believe
this
that...
is feeling much more like a statement than a question.
No, Bertrand Russell believes that the universe did not have a beginning. He used to make fun of the idea that there was a beginning to the universe.
Sometimes believe that, not always.
Mr. Nugent has said that he has rested his beliefs on the scientific method. But if he cannot believe that 2 + 2 equals 4, can he not see that it would, if scientists had his frame of mind, we never would have come to the conclusion that there was a Big Bang and science would not have advanced. We must have certainties, in logic at least, in order to advance science.
Yeah, I've no idea where you got the idea that I don't believe 2 plus 2 is 4.
But you're not certain.
You can't be certain of
Yeah,
anything.
you can't be, exactly.
You're not sure of it then.
Exactly.
It could be 24.
Yeah, okay, I can try saying it again. There are things that I strongly believe based on applying reason to the best available evidence. Anything that I believe, I am happy to say that.
What you're saying
anything
is
that I believe.
the equation is a faith issue. 2 plus 2 could be 24, but on the faith, you're going to say it's 4.
I'm just going to get in here, by the way, folks, and say I don't know why everybody's so terrified. It's like 2 plus 2 equals 4. We are certain of this.
Correct.
Because it's an a priori truth, and it's nothing to do with our experience of the reality. It is a constructed truth. And
it's an
it doesn't touch anybody's faith.
Can I say something?
It's a priori knowledge. It's nothing to do with empirical knowledge and synthetic knowledge and all that. And
can I just say something?
We don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
Can I just finish what I was
Go
saying? Yeah, I don't want I don't want the fact that I'm not certain about things to be confused with the idea that I don't have strong beliefs about things. You know, I can believe things very strongly based on applying reason to evidence, while still being open to the idea that I might be mistaken. I might be, you know, I might be just have some mental disability that just causes me to just be mistaken about things. You know, I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with acknowledging that you might be mistaken. In fact, I think it's one of the key ways that we advance our knowledge about anything is by being open to the idea that we might be mistaken.
But it's reality.
I'm just astonished that you think that that's a bad thing. You know?
I'd like to respond to that quick question of certainty, and maybe related to something that Michael had said earlier. Michael defined faith as believing something disproportionate to the best available evidence.
Yeah.
You know, I don't accept at all that definition of faith. I would call that myself insanity, believing something disproportionate to the best available evidence. But at the beginning of my presentation, I said we need to, in order to begin to do any reasoning, we need assumptions. And those are the assumptions, that's what we call, you could say, that's faith there. I have faith that the laws of logic work. My faith is built on reason. My faith is built on logic. And that's how I know I'm certain about the laws of logic, certain about the laws of reason.
Is it faith or insanity to believe in transubstantiation?
Is it faith or insanity? Right, so this is, I would say it's faith and there is evidence for it.
Okay,
evidence for it.
Let's go with further.
But here's the point, but I think it's
no, give us the evidence.
No, because this is an important point. We're debating first the existence of God, and like it's a bit like saying, can I just say, just in response, we could just say, look, you believe 1 and 1 is 2, right? And then as a result, you've got mobile phones and laptops. There is a whole chain of reasoning before we get to that. Before we get to that end. And if we start with the question, does God exist? There are loads of other questions that are equally interesting, like is there a true religion? If there is one, which one is it? What are the qualities of this religion? What's a good morality? All of those questions are valid questions, but we, as a rational approach, we answer one at a time. And it's not fair to take something way down the line and make fun of it when we haven't established it.
I wasn't making fun of it. I was responding to
you. No, I mean challenge it even until we've established the first.
Okay, well, do you believe in transubstantiation?
Yes.
Okay, what's your evidence for it?
Well, you see, it would take a long presentation.
Here's the conclusion, the last line.
But I have to establish, we're talking about, you see, I think this is, Alex, can I explain by an analogy? I teach mathematics, right?
Yeah.
And mathematics is based on axioms, and if I'm teaching Euclidean geometry, I can demonstrate that the angles in a triangle add up to 180 degrees. When we accept that, we move on. And after a couple of weeks, I'm proving Pythagoras' theorem, and a student says to me, how long? He says, I don't buy that 180 degrees carry on first. So and gives out about your Pythagoras' theorem is a bit crazy as a result. I say, no, hold on, let's go back to the basics.
Okay, well,
So-
give us the Pythagoras theorem version of transubstantiation.
No,
Just give
my
us the end
point
bit.
is, no, but you see, look,
Give us the end bit just to see whether we can.
no, because now see, what you're doing here is you're avoiding the question.
No, I'm avoiding the question.
No, the question at hand, does God exist?
No, that's the question we were discussing earlier on. We're now
Yes.
discussing, do you believe in
So you-
transubstantiation?
Right.
Because we're not an audience discussion question, and the issue of faith.
Right, so, yeah, it's a different debate. No, let me even put it this way. Is there a true religion? And if which one is true? That's a question I can argue as well. But who do you argue it with?
Well,
You
try arguing
argue
what
with the people-
transubstantiation would be.
No, but you see, in order to
Will you
argue...
accept that God, for the purposes of this argument, you accept that God exists?
Of course not.
Well, then there's no point in having the
Yeah, there's no
argument.
point having that discussion.
That's not the case, because the context in which you got here was you said that you follow the evidence
Yes.
in order to form your beliefs. You
Yes.
said that you didn't accept my definition of faith, which
Yes.
was
Yes.
believing in this approach to the evidence. You said that you would call that insanity.
Yes.
I then asked what about your belief in transubstantiation.
Well, do you believe in quantum mechanics?
On the basis. No, I didn't say no. I'm not going to go down that road. I'm happy with it once you answer this question here. So what we're trying to identify then is in order to determine whether you believe whether your belief in transubstantiation is based on, in your words, faith or insanity, or then what is your evidence that leads you, not me, to believe in transubstantiation?
Look, all I can say here in response to this is that there is a logical process, almost a mathematical path.
Okay, tell us
if you
about
will.
it.
And that is, when we establish God exists, then we have to figure out, is there a true religion? What quality of the true religion would that? What would it be? Can we identify it if it exists? And if we can, then what truths, what evidence do we have? Do we have any further revelation? Or if there is, what are the consequences of that? And after a long process of reason, you can get to transubstantiation. Now that's my claim, but that's not what we're talking about today. Just like I can say, yeah.
What's the last line in that process? What's the last sentence in that process?
But you see, my point is about how this is comparable to quantum physics. And this is comparable to quantum physics. In order to understand or accept quantum physics, you have to go through a whole process of learning about physics. It doesn't all seem apparent at first, but you have to go through, you have to learn it for a few years before you understand the whole chain of events. So we can't start at the end, we start at the beginning, and that's why we're here.
Okay, any more questions? If there's no more questions, then I will invite the speakers to a 5-minute summation. Do you want to go first?
Okay. Will I go up here, will I? You want to turn the cameras? Okay, can you hear me?
And we're talking for a maximum of 5 minutes, and I will be very sorry.
Okay, right.
As I said, we all have public vote.
Okay. Okay, so the question was that we were posed today, does God exist? It's a very simple question, and as you probably could see in the Q&A, it's very easy for us to get distracted from the actual question we have at hand. Homer Simpson was famously, when Marge tried to get him to go to church, he famously responded, what happens if we go to the wrong church? We make God madder and madder. Well, it's quite funny, but he avoiding the question, and that's very easy for us to do. He's avoiding the question which religion is true, or he's even avoiding the question, does God exist? So I just want to take you to a green field site. And in this green field site, we see a structure, we see a building of some description. And myself and Michael are here, and Michael says, I think this might have been done just by pure chance, it just happens to be there. And I say there's a builder, and he says, look, it just exists, get with the program. Or even look at all of the atheist arguments from this analogy. He might say, well, listen, you all disagree on what the builder looks like. Some say he's tall, some say he's small, some say he's blue eyes, some say he's green eyes, therefore there's no builder. Or you might say that if we have got a long enough time and it's a big enough area, something like this would eventually happen. But I'm going to push the analogy a wee bit more, and we end up at a fountain, and we see the water gushing up and cascading down. Nothing nearly as complex as we find in nature. And Michael says, oh no, that just happened. It took billions and billions of years, pure chance and serendipity. I say, no, somebody did it. And then Michael takes out his friend, I don't know if he is your friend or not, but Richard Dawkins, a scientist who says, hold on, I can explain this. There's a solar panel there, and the solar panel drives a motor that pushes the water up and down. Now I know how it works. There's no need for a designer. And finally, we've got an agnostic. The agnostic comes along, and we say to them, well, what do you think? We can see this fountain, this operation. What's your opinion? Oh, I don't know. Does that sound reasonable? Or even, nobody knows. Is that a reasonable conclusion? And in fact, now when we have established that there must be a designer and whose timeless place is an immaterial, the other questions of what religion is through, how should we live our lives, is there an objective moral order, they're very interesting questions, and we answer them one at a time.
Okay, I think this has been a very useful evening. I think regardless of what we came in here believing or leave believing, I think these discussions are useful because we'll all learn something from what other people are saying. With regard to that last contribution, I think if you imagine that same discussion, but imagine it happening pre-Darwin and imagine it happening about how animals came to be. And you'd have the exact same conversation you could imagine with people assuming that it's ridiculous that there could be, that animals could have come about in the way they did without a designer. And then Darwin showed how natural evolution enabled that to happen and how the illusion of design can be there where there actually isn't any design. So we're now at a stage where there are various cosmologists and physicists vying to potentially be the Darwin of physics. And there are various people working very hard every day on these very difficult questions. And I think that while we don't yet know the answer, and as I said, there's three big questions that we don't yet know the answer to. What happened before the Big Bang or beyond the Big Bang? How life began and how consciousness works. The relentless, absolutely relentless 100% pattern of previous supernatural explanations for phenomena being overtaken by natural scientific explanations means that it's a reasonable default position to take that when we discover the answer to those questions, if indeed we do, maybe we won't, maybe our minds aren't capable of understanding it. Maybe it'll take us evolving into a new species before we can understand it, just as a cat can't understand algebra. But if and when those answers come, on the basis of this relentless evidence of history, it is more likely to be a natural explanation than a supernatural explanation. The question we were asked today was, does God exist? I took the properties that a God, that the theistic God in particular is supposed to have. I showed that they were incoherent and self-contradictory. I showed that a universe without God is far closer to what the universe actually looks like, and that morality without God is far closer to what human morality actually looks like. Thank you very much.
Well, I would like to thank both of the speakers. I think they've done a tremendous job tonight. I'd like to thank you who have contributed enormously to the quality of the debate and the level of civility that we've enjoyed. I'd like to thank the university. I'd like to thank the Knights of Columbanus who have sponsored the evening. And I suppose there are just two things left to do. Before I put the question to the vote, I just want to read you a little scripture of my own, which I thought was relevant, or perhaps to the topic tonight, from a book that I'm very fond of. You may recognise some of it. Some of you may recognise it. Stop it, stop it, Lieutenant Chaiskov's wife screamed suddenly and began beating him ineffectually about the head with both fists. Yossarian ducked behind his arm for protection while she slammed away at him in feminine fury for a few seconds, and then he caught her determinedly by the wrists and forced her gently back down on the bed. What the hell are you getting so upset about? He asked her, bewilderedly, in a tone of contrite amusement. I thought you didn't believe in God. I don't, she sobbed, bursting violently into tears, but the God I don't believe in is a good God, a just God, a merciful God. He's not the mean and stupid God you make him out to be. Yossarian laughed and turned her arms loose. Let's have a little more religious freedom between us, he proposed obligingly. You don't believe in the God you want to, and I won't believe in the God I want to. Is that a deal? So I think if we all have a little more tolerance to each other, and the kind of tolerance we've seen tonight, I think that's a very positive thing. So now I will put the question to the House. Does God exist? Aye. Those who agree that God does exist, please show your hands. And those who disagree, those in the negative. Apparently, if democracy works, God exists. Thank you very much.